established and coordinated the EWT's Rhino Response Project, having recently trained and certified as an animal welfare inspector through the Food Safety Agency, and having been involved in the ministerial high-level panel report as a welfare representative. And that's really just a selection of an incredible CV, someone who's extremely qualified to talk to us about lived realities in our regime. Thanks.
It's not the one. Keep moving until we get there. That one. Okay.
One more time.
There we go. Okay, I'll try and be as quick as possible. Afternoon, everyone. It's amazing to be here and such a privilege to chat to you. I'm going to bring the whole thing right down to absolute basics. So we've heard all of these amazing intellectual arguments. We've heard all the visions and everything about values and the Constitution. But I'm going to bring it right down to what it means as an animal law inspector and what it means working on the ground and how the law that we work with can be improved, what works with it and what doesn't work with it. So the current situation that we're faced with, and that is that a new animal welfare bill represents the yin and yang that we use in disaster. When you have an emergency or a disaster or a situation of change, the one side of it represents danger and the other side represents opportunity. And this animal welfare bill represents exactly that. It represents the danger of possibly going back to a very production and use-focused bill, and we'll go into a little bit of the history of that just now, and maybe losing some of the strengths that have been gained. But on the other hand, it represents this incredible opportunity to see if we can actually improve on what we've got and get a better deal for animals. We're going backwards again. Here we are. It helps when you put the glasses on. I'm not going to go into all the Constitution and the rights and the various judgments. I'm sure all of you are aware of those incredible precedent. You need teeth as well. Precedent-setting judgments, including the one that Judge Colloquium did on the lion bone judgment. But just to say that the Constitution, whilst it has really, really great value and things that we need to embolden in the animal protection legislative framework, for the APA, and I'm sure the inspectors present will back me up on this, it did present certain challenges in that the Constitution very, very strongly firmed up on ownership and privacy rights. So access that SPCA inspectors used to get relatively easily, warrants that were relatively easy, that weren't easily challenged, the right of access to properties, those have all been made much, much more difficult because of the ownership and the privacy rights that were brought in with the Constitution. The drafting of the new AWB, as we know, is a danger as well as an opportunity. And the reason that it's problematic is it hasn't been transparent or inclusive. It's lacked clarity. There have been shifting timelines. We don't know. It's coming out now, then it's coming out then it's going to be incorporate this, then it's going to be drafted by OP. So we've had a total lack of clarity. And then there is concern that because of who is doing the drafting, that we may be going towards production and use-based, which is definitely, after what we were hearing this morning, what we don't want. We want totally the opposite. But in saying that, and Judge Colloquium put it very eloquently this morning, South Africa is a participatory democracy. Not only are those rights entrenched in our Bill of Rights, but the right to public participation and to input into what's going on are embedded in NEMBA as well. So we have this dual thing when it comes to animals, to be able to input, and we need to use those rights. And then just remembering when people talk about that I have the right to use and I have the right to earn a living, along with those rights come responsibilities. And one of those responsibilities is to make sure that the way we treat animals and the way we view animals in our environment is much better than we're currently doing. So just taking some of the history back and the motivation, the original idea for a new animal welfare bill and where it came from. And as I go through this, I actually wanted to say at the beginning, if anybody wants to throw anything, please don't do eggs and tomatoes. I would prefer chocolates, and just aim so that there's no injuries. And I'll share as well if there are enough of them. But just going to the motivation for a more animal use and production-based regulatory framework goes all the way back to the Thule elephant debacle. And I say debacle because it absolutely was. If it wasn't so serious, it would have been an absolute circus. And because it was felt that the NSPCA were challenging the rights to utilize elephants sustainably, to catch them from Botswana, beat them, train them, confine them, it was felt that there was a new animal law or an animal welfare framework approach. And that's where it really started. And then every time there's been a lot of kickback against existing systems. So when there's been challenges to people saying, listen, what you're doing is actually cruel, this whole resurgence of having a new animal welfare bill came in. So there really is a danger, and we need to make sure that as the animal welfare community, that as this opportunity presents itself, that we make sure that it's a better deal for animals. I have a poll come up, so we just need to get rid of that. Are you seeing the polls? No, you're not seeing it. It's okay. There we go. So what can we, as the animal welfare, the animal protection and conservation community, and I've included conservation, because we have one of the largest and fastest growing wildlife industries in the world. So wildlife are very much involved. They're not happily roaming out there free and happy, free living. They're involved and they're being used. So we must use our right to the public participation. Here's an opportunity. Use your voice, talk, get involved in the stakeholder processes. But at the same time, we need to be both realistic. So what is the environment in which we work, and how do you actually apply what is happening with law enforcement and animal welfare? But at the same time, we want to be idealistic. We want to bring in those values. We want to bring in Ubuntu. We want to bring in a better deal for animals. So finding that realism and that balance between idealism and realism. We need to be completely pragmatic and practical. And the reason is we work in a very restricted environment. So whatever legislation we develop, whatever framework is used going forward, needs to be applicable and practical. We need to also take forward what's working. Yes, the APA is a very old piece of legislation, and yes, it has a lot of Victorian things in it, but there are components of it that from a practical purpose on the ground, we actually need to incorporate and take forward and maybe change some of the wording, but there is stuff that works. And then, and this is where I'm into that, we need to present a united front. The game industry is huge. It's absolutely huge. But they may disagree with each other on many, many issues, but it never comes out public. They never attack each other on social media. They never attack each other in public meetings. Unlike the animal welfare and protection community, which is really small, and yet we're on social media taking each other to pieces. So we need to present a united front, not for ourselves, not for our organizations, but for the sake of animals and a better framework, whatever happens going forwards. This is really challenging, keeps changing. Did we miss one? No. Okay, so some of the things that we need to take forward and incorporate. I'm not a lawyer, I don't write legal things, but finding the right words, taking these things into consideration in the new and the proposed framework. We need to look at the current existing judgments and case law and make sure we don't lose that, so that the wording that is used, the approaches that are used, we don't lose all of those judgments and the case law that exists. There's incredible expertise and experience within the animal welfare community on applying animal welfare law, working with the courts, the practical stuff. How do you approach a magistrate? How do you pick up the SAPs to come and work with you? So we need to incorporate somehow that expertise and experience and not lose it. There's also a lot of things that have become custom and practice. When you read the APA, when you read the PAPA, when you read some of this act, it's not obvious. It's not written into law, but there are things that have become custom and practice that you don't necessarily want to lose. The owner and control is a really important one. And David, maybe we need to change the wording, but there needs to be some way of allocating responsibility and allocating that responsibility to the person who purchased that animal and put it in his home and chose to have it, who chose to farm, to the researcher who darts an animal and puts a big collar on. So that owner and control, making sure that we have a wide range of being able to allocate responsibility that includes everyone who's involved. And somehow bringing forward the omission and commission so that you don't just charge the people who are committing the animal cruelty, but you're also able to allocate responsibility to people who fail to stop cruelty or fail to report cruelty. So the omission and commission and the broadness of that. Government inspectorate may sound great, but a lot of people who are involved in on-the-ground animal welfare work, as you've seen from some of the comments and the kickback today, there's a passion, and we don't want to lose that. And then, David, you mentioned the socio-economic impact assessment, outdated, incomplete, and fails to take into account a whole number of both human and animal factors, resources, and the realities. So regardless of what the new or the keeps telling me it wants a poll. Yeah, it's fine. Okay, so regardless of what the new amended or expanded animal law will be, we need to be very, very aware, right, I'm going to speed it up, of the society we work in. It's violence, it's desensitized, high levels of domestic and gender-based violence, and apparently we are going to tackle that. We have a judicial system that is under pressure, and we need to be aware that you're dealing with magistrates in a lot of your animal welfare cruelty cases. When you go to get a warrant, very, very basic stuff like that. Those guys live in that community. So when you walk in and you say, what a warrant is, no sooner are you out of that office, and this sounds crazy, but it's what happens. No sooner are you out of that office and he's on the phone. Listen, Joe, those people that trouble, they're on their way to you. So you get there and he's got his attorney standing at the gate, takes one look at your warrant and says, no. And you've then got a fight. And by the time you get onto the property, guess what? It's clean. The animals have been hidden. So we need to be very, very aware of what we're working in, and that it needs to be practical. And this thing I'm going to throw out the window. And then I'm not going to go through this because it was mentioned and apparently it's going in, but somehow in law and in sentencing, we do need to bring in those links between human violence and animal violence and the levels of criminality and compliance. In addition to some of the common suggestions like moving welfare legislation to justice or another department, changing the burden of proof in cruelty necessary versus unnecessary, massively increasing sentences, also balancing ownership issues against animals' best interests, we need to add a range of options of different penalties that can be imposed. Administrative penalties, civil penalties, a whole range, depending on the situation, so that you don't have the guy who is charged for cruelty to one dog and a farmer who is being cruel to 500 sheep being charged with the same penalties, because it doesn't work that way. And then looking at the criminal record pros and cons. Yes, it's a great part of a sentence is to get a criminal record. But very often people don't know ahead of the time that they actually could get a criminal record, so it's not a deterrent. And again, you're going to magisterial level. Those magistrates live in those communities. So when he looks at the threshold between giving this guy a conviction that is going to give him a criminal record that is going to prevent him from getting a job, he's going to not necessarily going to work for me. So we need to have a range of things. And I did very, very quick research and spoke to a couple of human resource organizations in discussing this. And that once you get to the higher levels, that criminal record doesn't count. The guys look at it and they say, oh, you got arrested for having dacha 20 years ago. You know what? I also smoked. Don't worry. Oh, you got caught because you were cruel to your dog. It's not going to affect how you manage the bank. So we need to have that range of penalties. Back here, we need to formalize the training and have some kind of qualifications framework on a much broader level, maybe training AHTs additionally for work in rural areas. And then I have a look at some of the traditional and cultural options. We've spoken a lot about that. If you go back to the white paper on traditional leadership and governance, it was actually proposed that they would advise government and participate in programs geared to prevent cruelty to animals. So changing that from shall to must. And then this is one that's really close to my heart and that I really believe could make a difference. I actually come from a wildlife background, but feel very strongly about this. And that is the introduction of options for specialized compulsory inspectors. And one of the options would be for abattoirs. So every single abattoir, if you think of the number of animals that are killed, handled, transported and taken through abattoirs on a daily basis, chickens, 3 million slaughtered a day in South Africa, and they're treated as batch welfare. They're not seen as individuals. We need to look at things like what really happens in an abattoir. Monday mornings, Friday afternoons, just before tea time, just before the long weekend and payday, the conditions are worse. We need to have welfare inspectors, highly specialized, highly trained, who know the technical details of how electrical stunning works. And this sounds brutal. What needs to be done? How do you recognize when an animal is unconscious? Who actually is on the floor all the time and has powers to stop or start or intervene, who is standing there with the meat safety inspector. And what you see on those post-mortem inspections indicate what's going on down the line. And he can immediately, SPCA can then come in afterwards, they can look at the records of the animal welfare officer and then do what they've got to do. But the current thing, we're seeing only snapshots. And then away with it, what they're seeing on the meat safety inspections at the end. A lot of the meat is discarded, where there's been cruelty and the sheep arrive all underweight or in bad condition. That meat then gets scrapped. It's not allowed to be used for human consumption, and the farmer loses some money per carcass. We need to be able to follow back on some of those things. And the guy who's sending 200 sheep that arrive in a truck with broken legs or in very poor condition, there has to be something more. So that is, and also the administration of medication, very strict animal welfare assistant controls, very strict controls on, what you can and can't do to your pets. But as a farmer, you must see what comes out at the end of those lines. Okay, so that's just a suggestion. Same thing would apply with the game meat strategy, that we have no norms and standards, no regulations, and the culling and harvesting of those animals is uncontrolled in terms of how the humane component is handled. Support the well-being clause. And when I say this, it's not just because we want that well-being clause in there and there's value, but we need to be linking legislation more. So animal welfare legislation, whatever it is, needs to be linking with environmental legislation, needs to reference other legislation. Incorporate disaster and response and emergency components into the law and link that as well to the legislative framework that's planned. So there we go. Thank you very much. And once again, we want this as an opportunity. And just say this.
I'm looking forward to some conversation about it shortly. So our next speaker is Tokyo Ndlela. Tokyo was a student of mine many, many years ago, one of my favorite students of all time, because the best students are the ones who teach you something about yourself and about how to see the world differently. And so it's really a full circle moment for me to be introducing you. I'm incredibly proud. And he's now managing partner of Tokyo Ndlela Attorneys, a law firm specializing in commercial and environmental matters, a non-executive director of Animal Law Reform South Africa, and an executive officer of the Southern Institute of Mining and Metallurgy, a globally recognized professional institute overseeing the mining industry, He's contributing to animal law scholarship in the country, helping us establish a field of animal law, and of course has a excellent LLB and LLM in environmental law from the University of Pretoria, as well as an MBA from International University of Applied Sciences in Germany. So looking forward to hearing Tokyo.
Yeah, I think, yeah. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Melanie, for the introduction. Today, I'll be discussing a topic that is commonly under-discussed, in my opinion, and that topic is farmed animals. So here's an outline of what I'll be looking into today. So number one, the realities of farmed animals and impacts of factory farming. Number two, the regulatory framework overlooking farmed animals. Number three, shortcomings of regulation. Number four, looking ahead. Firstly, for purposes of this discussion, I would like to define a farmed animal as a domesticated animal raised in an agricultural setting to produce commodities such as meat, eggs, milk, fur, leather, skins, and wool. From this term, it is clear that there's an emphasis on the utility of the farmed animal towards humans. This anthropocentric perspective shapes the realities of farmed animals, as their treatment and protective legislation centers around their utility. So, and also the purpose of a factory farm is to make optimal use of space and other resources to maximize production and increase profits. But of course, this profit machine comes with a few risks. So I'd like you to imagine if you were a chicken placed into a similar situation, as shown in the image. You are in a crowded and confined space. Tell me, what would you be at the risk of? This is a question to the audience. Disease, yes, overcrowding, so mental health impacts as well, stress, that's correct. And it is important, it is important to remember that due to the maximization of profits, animal breeding programs tend to focus on production of traits at the expense of other traits that are necessary for the physical and mental well-being of farmed animals. As a result of this, there are common practices within factory farming that prove the aforementioned statements, which we'll look into. As part of our corporate accountability program, Animal Law Reform South Africa released two in-depth reports on the highly industrialized egg industry in South Africa in 2023 and 2024. 95% of egg-laying hens are confined to battery cages in South Africa, where each bird is given less than an A4 sheet of paper space. These hens are debeaked and detoed without anesthesia or painkillers, causing acute and chronic pain. Male chicks deemed economically useless to the industry are typically shredded alive in macerators, and these practices continue without legal consequence. Pigs, cattle, and other farmed animals endure a range of cruel and routine practices across industrial farming systems. These include painful mutilations without anesthesia, such as tail docking and castration, confinement in gestation and veal crates, and the separation of mothers from their young shortly after birth. Animals are often subjected to high concentrate, unnatural diets, live transport under inhumane conditions, and torture breeding for traits like rapid growth or high yield, which compromises the welfare of that farmed animal. Many are kept in extreme confinement, often indoors, with no environmental enrichment, and young animals are frequently isolated or tethered, restricting movement and natural behavior. To grasp the scale of animal agriculture, consider this. Every minute, over 15,000 animals are slaughtered worldwide to satisfy human demand for meat. And that demand is only increasing. Global meat production continues to rise, intensifying pressure on animals, ecosystems, and already strained food systems. Based on the previous slide, here's an estimate of how many farmed animals are slaughtered every day, as you can see. And just to highlight, every 24 hours, between 3.4 and to 6.5 billion farmed animals are killed for food. A lower end estimate is that 1.2 trillion farmed animals are killed every year. I would like to contrast this with an estimate as to the total number of humans who's ever existed, which is 117 billion. Here is further data on the global number of farmed animals slaughtered every day in 2021. Factory farming is accelerating meat consumption across the globe, including in Africa. But by 2030, meat consumption on the continent is projected to rise by 30% from a low starting point. South Africa leads this trend, ranking as Africa's largest meat consumer and 7th globally. However, data on animal slaughter in South Africa, it remains limited, making it difficult to accurately quantify the scale of production. Now, just dealing with the reality of the environment impacted by farmed animals. Our planet is facing multiple socio-ecological crises, including climate change, with factory farming being a significant yet often overlooked contributor. In South Africa, where poverty, food insecurity, limited access to resources, and inequality are pressing issues, the environmental damage from factory farming exacerbates these challenges. The confinement of large number of animals leads to overgrazing, land degradation, and the concentrated release of methane, which contributes 39% to global greenhouse gas emissions. Agriculture uses excessive amounts of land, with over 50% of the world's habitable land dedicated to agriculture, 80% of which is for livestock. Additionally, the slaughter of farmed animals generates waste pollution such as feces, discarded milk, and detergents that pollutes water supplies, accelerates soil erosion, and reduces long-term soil fertility. These are some of the other environmental impacts, such as biodiversity loss, deforestation, wild animal deaths, ocean dead zones, animal extinction, and the increasing frequency and severity of natural disasters. This infographic is from Animal Law Reform's second report on the egg industry, which highlights the significant environmental harm caused by egg production. It illustrates, among other issues, that egg production requires vast amounts of water, with 135 liters needed to produce a single egg. Other animal-derived products also consume excessive amounts of water. For example, just producing 1 kilogram of bovine meat, which includes beef, requires 15,415 liters of water. The production of beef and other animal-derived products also release large amounts of greenhouse gases, far more than non-animal-derived products. So, for example, if you can take a look at the data, right at the bottom, you see your potatoes, you see bananas, you see nuts. But as you start moving up, you begin to see pig meat, beef, lamb, and mutton, showing the extent to which they contribute to the greenhouse gas emission. Now, looking at the reality of humans impacted by farmed animals. Harm caused by animal agriculture is often overlooked, especially in marginalized communities. Poverty limits choices, and many impoverished communities in urban areas rely on affordable protein sources like eggs, often unaware of the associated risks. Living near production facilities, these vulnerable groups endure environmental impacts such as water and air pollution. Farm workers exposed to harmful toxins face high risk of respiratory diseases like asthma and chronic bronchitis. Additionally, factory farms are major contributors to antibiotic resistance, using 73% of antibiotics in agriculture, which leads to the rise of superbugs. Factory farms are also responsible for more than 50% of zoonotic diseases emerging in humans, causing 2.7 million deaths annually. Workers are subjected to distressing conditions, including witnessing sick and dying animals, being required to engage in acts that desensitize them to violence, such as slaughter, mutilation, etc., further exacerbating the workers' hardships. There are also other significant risks associated with consuming meat and animal-derived products due to the practices used in factory farming. Excessive meat consumption has been found to be one of the 4 leading risk factors for chronic illnesses, according to the World Health Organization. And now we'll just take a look at the regulatory framework overlooking farmed animals. And of course, the starting point would be the, I think we all know Section 24. I can see I'm short on time. The laws governing farmed animals in South Africa include a combination of animal welfare legislation and food safety regulations. Welfare-focused laws, such as the Animals Protection Act and the SPCA Act, are overseen by the Department of Agriculture, and but to fill legal gaps, soft laws like SAB standards and industry codes, such as those for poultry and dairy, are commonly used. Food safety and animal health are regulated through laws such as we have the Meat Safety Act and the Animal Health Act and the Foodstuffs, Cosmetics and Disinfections Act. In addition to welfare and food safety laws, environment-centric legislation also plays a role. The Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment oversees the National Environmental Management Act and its specific environmental management acts, such as the National Environmental Management Biodiversity Act, which are important for protecting biodiversity and regulating human impact on the environment. And now just examples of the shortcomings of regulation. While there are laws in place to protect animals from harm, such as those addressing confinements and other inhumane practices, there are virtually no prosecutions for widespread practices like caged chickens, sows in gestation crates, and veal kept in crates. This highlights a significant gap between the legal framework and its actual enforcement, allowing harmful practices to continue unchecked. Gaps in legislation leave farmed animals vulnerable. Industry codes and standards, though intended to address these gaps, are voluntary and not enforceable. The Animals Protection Act is outdated and only regulates overt cruelty, while there are no species-specific welfare laws. Fragmented government efforts focus on narrow mandates, lacking a holistic approach. This anthropocentric framework underrepresents the interests of farmed animals. Societal indifference and weak enforcement also perpetuates a cycle of exploitation and suffering. As you can see from some of the headlines, it's as though South Africa is creating new frameworks for meat consumption, which further intensifies animal agriculture. These government plans are often framed as solutions to food insecurity and job creation, but reflect a growing anthropocentric focus, prioritizing human interests over the interest of animals. Now, efforts to reduce reliance on animal-derived products, such as promoting plant-based meat alternatives, have faced resistance from the government and stakeholders in the meat industry. As you can see from the headlines, such as South Africa Meat CEO says plant-based products could confuse consumers. As things stand, plant-based producers are in a limbo, as there is no clarity on what they can refer to their products as. Now, looking ahead, South African courts have been pivotal in advancing animal protection, with the Constitutional Court recognizing that the rationale behind animal welfare has evolved from merely safeguarding human interests to acknowledging the intrinsic value of animals as individuals. With the upcoming Animal Welfare Bill, which we hope will be shaped by the Animal Law Project's manifesto, alongside developments such as the inclusion of wild animal well-being in the National Environmental Management Biodiversity Act, and courts embracing the need for an integrative approach, we're witnessing promising strides towards stronger animal protection. Thank you.
As a great lawyer, Tokyo presented an evidence-based argument as to why we should transform animal law. Go ahead. Our next speaker is Kwixi Sontag, Dr. Kwixi Sontag, who is a qualified vet and has been since 1986, the owner of EduPet Veterinary Behavior Consulting, and co-owner of Mooikloof Companion Animal Center, which is a pet hotel and spa Dog and Behavior Center, and Pet Relocation Service. So really remarkable things that you're doing currently. But in addition, Quixie has worked as a private veterinarian for 22 years. She then joined the Faculty of Veterinary Science at University of Pretoria and lectured there until 2023, training veterinary science and veterinary nursing students in animal behavior, handling, and welfare, as well as life skills. In this role, Quixie was leader for the World Organization for Animal Health Welfare Twinning Program, which is a collaboration with various institutions globally, and has done a whole bunch of other really fascinating things and really important things. For the sake of time, I'll hand over to Quixie, but just to highlight, she's also a very active member today in the veterinary professional bodies, regularly speaks at congresses and continuing professional development events, and acts as an expert witness in dog aggression and animal welfare cases. So again, eminently qualified to talk to us about animal law in practice and lived realities. And we hand over to you, Quixie. Thank you. If this will fit here. Sorry, we thought you were going to go. There we go.
Thank you. Okay, put this one here. Thank you very much, firstly, to the organizers. It's really a great event, and I'm very privileged to be here, and I think that is the correct use of the word privilege. Okay. After all the discussions we've had, and I just want to give credit to all the people here, and online and out there that are at the coal face of looking after the interests of animals. Karen is somebody who's been there for so long, and it's just amazing and I'm sort of singling you out, but it's everybody here, all the NSPCA people, all the animal welfare inspectors, everybody. Thank you for the work that you guys put in. It's appreciated. So I don't have a PowerPoint today. I've gone anti-PowerPoint. It's part of my semi-retirement liberation. Okay. And what's also really nice for me today is I'm not here representing anybody but myself. Okay. So I'm going to tell you about my lived reality as a vet who's interested in animal welfare. So I'd like to tell you a bit more about vets, because I think we are in the minority here, and yes, I agree with the sign outside that animals need lawyers and animals need vets. Okay, so I'll focus a little bit on that, and then I do have a few comments also about the proposals and the manifesto and so on. I've really enjoyed everything before up to now. Everybody's made such valuable contributions. And I think there was a comment made that vets are a challenge in the sphere of animal welfare. So let's address those things. So I do represent myself, but I know a lot of vets. Okay, so that's where I'm coming from. So this is a little bit about vets from the horse's mouth, okay? I'd like to just acknowledge the other paraveterinary professions as well. So I'm focusing on vets today, but we are part of a team of regulated formal professions, including the animal health technicians, veterinary nurses, and a few others, and also the animal welfare assistants who are not a regulated profession at this stage, but they are authorized to do certain procedures and work within this veterinary field. So each of these professions have a scope of practice. And just to put it out there that perhaps if you weren't aware of that, that you can think about that. So what are vets? Vets are diverse, okay? And that's why I can't actually represent all vets. And I apologize in advance for any, if I offend any of my colleagues, you're welcome to talk to me afterwards. And you can also throw chocolates. I like that idea. Yes, please. So we work in different sectors. The majority of the 3,500 or so vets in South Africa are in private practice. So they run their own businesses. They are not subsidized or funded by anybody. Then we have vets, obviously, that work in welfare, like Bryce over there, and Bevan also does, and so on. We have vets that work in academia, that work in industry, pharmaceutical companies, and so on. And I've probably left out a few. But just to make it clear that all these different contexts also then end up with us having different views about things. And our animal ethics ideas differ a lot. Okay, so if you look at how people view the status of animals and you look at it as a continuum, on the one end you have people that support that animals have a very high status. They have a lot of rights. Okay, at the other end of the continuum, you have people that say animals have no status. We can do with them what we like. We can use and abuse them. And I think with the veterinary profession, you also have those different views, but most of us are in the middle. Okay, so most of us have a utilitarian approach where we see what is happening in the real world, but at the same time, we value the intrinsic value of animals. There are very few vets that I know that do not recognize the intrinsic value of animals. That's why we become vets. It's because we care about animals and we want the best for them. And that makes us experts in animals. We have the training to recognize when an animal is not doing well. And in fact, the whole field of animal welfare science is currently expanding so much that almost on a daily basis, new things are coming out. And one of the other things we are is we're pragmatic. So we look at the animal or the group of animals and we try and make an assessment based on our knowledge and experience. And in specifically animal welfare science, this is just exploding. We're learning so much about how to measure animal welfare, how to decide whether an animal or a group of animals is suffering, and if they are, to what extent, and then to know what to do about that. Now, not all vets are highly trained in this field, okay? And for me, that is a shortcoming. We need to address that. We need more vets, more capacity. We are also, unfortunately, in short supply. Okay, so there aren't enough vets, really, in South Africa to fulfill the needs of veterinary services in the country. And there's a whole lot of reasons for that, which we don't necessarily have a lot of control over. So we are amazing and great and wonderful, but we do tend to have a bit of a lager mentality, a bit of we know best and we don't want others to tell us what we know. And we prefer a little old boys club where only us will be the members, okay? So yes, that is also true. Can you hear me? Okay. Okay, oh yes. So that is something that I do feel and I do believe that our profession can perhaps improve on from my perspective. It's just my idea. we do need, as I said, more capacity in animal welfare in our profession. We need to be better informed about what we've been talking about here. For many vets, just the term animal rights is scary and threatening, okay, because they don't really know what it entails and what it means. So yes, definitely we are acknowledging that. And anything that isn't quite what, like we see it, is like unscientific bunny hugging, you know, so that is acknowledged. And I think knowledge on our part about what other people, the perspectives of other role players is going to help a lot. The other issue that I see in the veterinary profession and in our training is that it rightly is very animal focused, but we do need to be more people understanding as well. And that is the work that I was doing at the university in the last few years, was in community engagement. And how do we engage with people in a way that makes them receptive and willing to listen to other points of views? Thank you. I'm watching that timeline. So what vets try and do when they are faced with welfare challenges is they try and do the best they can with what they have. And then they often get criticized because they can't do everything perfectly. They can't change certain things, like the fact that industry requires certain procedures to be done. They feel that they cannot be left out and refuse to do any work for farmers or for large feedlots and organizations and entities where animals are cared for. They can't abstain and say, no, we don't like what you're doing, so we're not going to help the animals. Okay, so vets are put in a difficult situation. They are they face ethical dilemmas a lot of the time when they are trying to help animals, and then they get criticized for that. So I want to just advocate for vets as well as for the animals. So when the focus is primarily on profits, that is, I think, where most of the challenges come in. And also when the focus is primarily on human enjoyment, that is where the welfare challenges occur. I think that the existing legislation has too many threats in it and too little guidance. It's difficult to enforce and prosecute. It's very limited and rigid. So I like pretty much all of the recommendations that are in the manifesto that has been provided. I think that animal shelters should be more regulated. And I think that animal shelters should be more part of solving the underlying issue. And we spoke a little bit about that earlier, where most of the issues in animal welfare are produced by humans. And if we're only focusing on the animals and looking after them, which is laudable, I'm not saying we mustn't do that, we are just putting a plaster on it. So my big passion is to work with people and to empower people so that they can learn and change their behavior in terms of animal care. But that can only happen if we respect those people and if we try and understand where they are coming from. People often say we educate, we give help, we provide resources, but that's a very one-sided thing to do. We need to be doing it in a more humble way, in a more open way, in a more understanding of other people way. And that is when people start trusting you, and that is when people are amenable to possibly changing how they think and what they do. How's my time? 2 minutes. Okay, make it 3. So So I think my favorite enabler is number 4, the humane education training using science. We have to use science and base what we do on facts and on proper data that's generated in the correct way, and that's not happening. So I feel we need a lot more work to be done in terms of having that underlying basis on which we make our decisions. Now, I think animal law reform has done a wonderful job of generating some data and working with that. I would love for the Department of Agriculture to do more of that, and perhaps a more animal-based kind of approach as well, to see what is happening. Tokyo referred to a lot of statistics about what's happening in farm animals, but we also need to understand impacts on the people that are involved, and we also need to understand all the other sectors of animal welfare. Last word, I'm divided about which department should have custodianship, okay? I feel that vets are experts on animals and they should play a really important role. I understand that you can't be the ref and the player at the same time, but it might be possible to have this animal welfare office and the forum, the advisory forum, so independent and autonomous that it does not get influenced by what I see as the political interference. State vets are often criticized a lot, but you know what? I admire those vets because they work under extremely difficult circumstances. They have to do what their boss tells them. Their boss is told by a politician somewhere. I'm sorry, politicians that are here. I sound very negative about it. But the reality that I see from my perspective in the state veterinary services is that they want to get things done. A lot of them do. The ones that have the wherewithal, they do stuff. But it is unfortunate that they seem to be stymied at a higher level. And I want to be convinced that that same thing is not going to happen in another department as well. So that's kind of my thinking on that. And I have to stop now. So thank you for all your work.
Needs no introduction. I won't read Amy's bio. I will very briefly tell you a bit about her from my point of view. I prescribed Amy to my environmental law students long before I met her, because her work is some of the most novel and cutting edge in the animal law space, not just in South Africa, but globally. In South Africa, Amy has co-founded with David Animal Law Reform South Africa, and she's the executive director of Animal Law Reform South Africa. And I'm sure we share this experience that Amy is a driving force in everything that she does for improved animal protection, not just here, but around the world.
Okay, so welcome. I'm so grateful for everyone who's here. Really, truly appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to come and talk about animal law and the possibilities that lie ahead of us. I am immensely grateful for everyone. I'm going to be talking about the lived realities and how the law is failing animals from a lawyer's perspective. That's the only perspective that I can offer. I'm not an inspector. I deeply value what you do. I'm not a veterinarian. I deeply value what you do. This is my perspective of the law from somebody who understands how the law works. So I welcome any critiques and thoughts as well. So I'm going to start with some foundations. I'm going to do a high-level introduction. I'm going to take a critical look at the current law and some possibilities ahead. So humans and all other animals, where do we begin? Okay, right now we are all sitting on our beautiful blue planet, which we tend to forget, but we are flying through space at thousands of kilometers per hour. So let's just take a step back and recognize that. We are all Earthlings first and foremost on this beautiful planet. Our Earth has been around for 4.54 billion years at this point, okay? Homo sapiens, not so long, only about 200 to 250,000 years. We have a massive area of water and land that is occupied by millions and millions of other species. Those species are fungal species, they are plant species, and they are other animal species. But when we look at who holds rights, there's only one of us, right? One single species on this planet holds rights. And from a justice perspective, it's confounding. And I know rights might not be the right framing, but it is the framing of our current legislation. That is what is contained in our Constitution. So what does that mean for everyone else? Well, we as a species, our single Homo sapiens sapiens species has dominated every other species on this planet. The law looks at us as people, we are legal persons, and every other species is a legal thing. And when we consider that things are not all the same, a cheetah, a lion, a leopard, all these other kinds of animals that exist with us are not the same as a cell phone, are not the same as a piece of paper. This framework is really problematic, and it has allowed us to dominate and exert our influence and really do the most tremendously horrible things to everyone else that exists. So because of this classification as property, all animals are deemed as owned. They are not self-owning. Ownership does not equate to care. Just as an owner doesn't necessarily mean that you have to care in a certain way for the creatures that you take care of. Animals lack legal standing. That means they cannot go and stand in front of a court and assert their rights because they are things. And they have little to no protections. The assumption is that exploitation is the norm. And because of this, we view them as a plentiful and endless resource that are designed to be used and are useful and valuable only for our own human or anthropocentric needs. And as I've mentioned, this approach is problematic. It leads to neglect, it leads to cruelty, it leads to extinction, and various other human abuses and environmental harms. And that's just one example of something that's happening right now across the planet. That is a trawling net where you can just imagine the number of animals and other species that are caught up as bycatch, non-target species as they're referred to, in that single picture. And if that doesn't give you a sense of what is happening, I don't know what else might. So one thing that we as humans like to do is we like to draw lines. So we like to say, you are different to me. You are a man and I'm a woman. You are this and I am that. You are an other to me. And we have a very long, sordid history of othering in this country. And we have an abhorrent system of apartheid that showed us that. And while it's okay to do that and draw lines between people and differences, we cannot deny that we are animals as humans as well. We cannot deny our animality. We need to recognize that we are also animals, and what we are doing to the other animals on the planet is problematic. So what does it mean for society built on foundations of dignity, equality, and freedom? These values that Justice Colloquium spoke about. What does this mean for justice? We have in our Constitution pursuit of social justice. Are we doing well? I would argue not. So let's take a more detailed look at how things are dealt with by asking just a very basic question, right? Who or what is an animal? It seems like a very easy question, but in the eyes of the law, it's not, right? One might not argue it's very easy to assert that a dog or a cat is an animal, and an elephant similarly so. What about a pestilential mosquito, right? We all love those. What about a chicken? What about a baby? What about a coral or a fish? All of these are biologically animals. They belong to the kingdom Animalia, but we do not treat them in any way, shape, or form the same, and neither does our legal system. We differentiate between them based on our social values, based on our understanding of their cognitive capacities, you know, even Justice Colloquium said, you choose which animals you like, the ones you keep close. And our legal system does that too. And that's important as we consider not the current status only, but as we look forward to doing something better, where we can start to break apart these injustices and dismantle these separations that we've put in place. So the current Animals Protection Act defines animals in the way that you read it. I'm not going to read through that. There is some uncertainty about whether it applies to free roaming wild animals, aquatic species, and insects, right? I know that some courts have adjudicated on this issue, but there is no definitive and definite way that these animals are encapsulated. Other countries might define animal as every member of the kingdom Animalia except for humans. So considering a new framework, we might want to be a little bit more explicit about who or what an animal is. We also differentiate and define other animals as vermin or pests. So another way is that you can do whatever you want to an animal that's a vermin or a pest. You can destroy them, another complicated term that we use, as if they don't matter, right? And as we look forward to this new legislation, we need to pick apart how we define animals and look at the different circumstances in which they exist. And this brings me to my next question, right? Just a few from the audience, in what context do you associate this animal? You can shout out. Pets, okay? Lots of pets, okay. Food, great. Perfect. Okay, wonderful. So this actually here is Prince. He's my grandnephew. He's my niece's companion. And so in this case, he is a companion that lives in their home. But in any other circumstance, Prince could be a food animal. And in fact, the Department of Agriculture has just released rabbit meat regulations. He could be used for his fur or his skin or carried around as a trinket on somebody's bag. He could be a test subject in a laboratory being subjected to extremely cruel procedures for very long amounts of time. He could be a wild, free-roaming animal jumping around with other bunnies. He could be a therapy animal for someone living in their home. He could be considered as an invasive species or a pest. He could be used as a trained animal in sport or hunting shows. And in any one of these situations, the law treats Prince very differently. In some cases, if you were cruel to him, or if a veterinary, for one example, did something horrible, they could be charged with malpractice. But if he was a pest, he could be killed. So the law is very complicated in the way that it views animals, and recognizing that as we move forward into a new regulatory regime is very important. And our current regime is a tangled web, is the best way that I can describe it, because although the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, we regulate animals in three sort of basic ways. We have animal-centric legislation, envirocentric legislation, and human-centric legislation. And because animals exist in so many different places and they exist as so many different things in our society, we pass the buck between different departments: Department of Agriculture, Department of Environment, Department of Social Development, provincial departments, local departments. So all of these complexities are important. This unintegrated framework has led to gaps in our legislative framework. It's also allowed for us to not promulgate positive legal standards, which means there's a prevalence of soft law. And in this case, it's often filled by industry with industry-based standards that are voluntary and not enforceable. So this is one thing that hopefully we can agree is problematic. We need to have positive legal standards and we need to have certainty. So animal-centric legislation, the way that I frame this has some sort of protection for animals. So obviously the Animals Protection Act, the SPCA Act, Performing Animals Protection Act, and then there's various other laws that contain protective provisions, like the Meat Safety Act requires, for example, animals who are used for red meat to be slaughtered before, to be stunned before they are slaughtered. So they do exist in various places in the law, but they don't exist in one place that's clear. And then of course there's these soft standards. We also have environmental law that contains mostly for wild animals and how it impacts them. But of course, as Tokyo has mentioned, farm animals impact the environment too. You're not supposed to read all of this, by the way. It's just to show you that there's a lot of legislation when you start to look that affects animals. And that's not even it. There's human animal legislation. There's a plethora. Even the National Gambling Act affects animals, dog racing, horse racing, etc. So when you start to unpack the legislation that affects animals, it becomes really complex and overwhelming. But the point is, we have an opportunity now to bring things together, to look at all these different places where animals exist, to look at the biggest harms and the things that are happening to them, and try to develop a set of principles that can apply to them. So, looking critically at the law, obviously the Animals Protection Act was promulgated over 60 years ago. Has anything changed since then? I would say so. Our knowledge of science has changed. Our relationships with animals have changed. Technology has changed, so much so that when this was promulgated, we weren't intensively farming animals on a mass scale and killing 3 million chickens per day. That was simply not in the consciousness of people who were drafting legislation at this time. So we need to take a more aligned approach with what is actually happening today. Okay? We also need to look at the Constitution. We've already spoken a lot about that. And we also need to look at our changing societal values. Many people live in multi-species families. If you ask them about their dog or cat that they live with, they will tell you, that's my child, right? That is a very important relationship. Not to say that other animal relationships are not, but we need to recognize this. And just briefly, the Animals Protection Act, don't worry, I'm not going to go into a whole lecture about it, but I think it's important to see that it's not very long, right? The main thing it does is that it's a piece of criminal legislation that sets out crimes. It also sets out powers for enforcement agents, powers of the courts, powers of veterinarians, but it's not really a very long, complex piece of legislation. And as a criminal statute, it suffers from the fact that it's a criminal statute, which means that it needs to comply with criminal law. It takes a long time to get cases through the courts. Evidence can get lost in the way. Witnesses can get lost and influenced along the way. All sorts of things can happen in that time. And you also have to show beyond a reasonable doubt that somebody is guilty of a crime, which is a very heavy onus of proof. So I've gone through some of this, but if you look at actually what's contained in the law, it should, and definitely looking at practices that we do, arguably is criminal, right? There's only a handful of prosecutions per year, not to say that people are not working extremely hard to get prosecutions, but it's just the nature of the fact that it's a criminal law, right? That mechanism is an issue. So there's also very confusing terms like unnecessary suffering. What does it mean to cause an animal unnecessary suffering? What is the boundary of necessity? When do I cross that line of me doing something tremendously horrible to your physical being become necessary or not? So there's no certainty in those terms. It also contains terms like cruelly beating, and how one can uncruelly beat someone is also quite a staggering idea. It also interacts with all these different laws, as I've mentioned. We also have government policies promoting increased use. So the Master Poultry Plan, we're already killing millions of chickens per day. This is meant to increase it tremendously. We have a proliferation of soft law. And really what it does, this current framework, is entrenches this idea that animals are property for us to use. And although there's some limitation of what we can do, there's not much. And this is not aligned with the Constitution. It's not aligned with the Constitutional Court judgments, and it's definitely not aligned with international law. The penalties are problematic. They are simply not enough, and it's not necessarily always a good thing to put somebody in prison when they don't have necessarily the knowledge that others do. We don't hold corporations accountable who are arguably committing mass-scale crimes against animals, and we go after individuals. So looking at just a few examples, animal testing, if you look at the actual wording of the act, sorry, there was a trigger warning. It was very quick. I apologize. Please look away. If you look at the plain wording of the act, arguably a lot of the things that we're doing to animals in testing situations should be criminal. Many countries have banned cosmetic testing on animals. If you look at the live export of animals and the wording of the APA, arguably that is a crime in terms of the legislation. Countries are also banning live export. If we look at animals in circuses and the wording of the APA, arguably that's a crime. But Other countries have banned the use of animals in circuses. And battery cages, also looking at a plain wording of the legislation, arguably could constitute a crime, and many other countries have banned it. So I'm going to leave because I only have about 30 seconds left, just with some thoughts. I think we need to take advantage of these opportunities that the Constitution has given us, look at a values-based approach, move from prohibiting harm to a more positive framework, setting positive standards, looking at banning practices that are abhorrent, that we should not be as a society sanctioning, that are unnecessary if that's the framing that we want to use. We don't need to be doing these things to animals. There are alternatives, and we know better. So let's start with doing some of those things, and I look forward to your comments. Thanks.